The mug slipped. Petra Vane watched it go, a small pale clay cup, handle chipped on the lip, borrowed from the communal shelf 3 weeks ago and never returned. And in the half-second between her fingers losing contact and the inevitable crack of ceramic against the greenhouse's stone-tile floor, something happened that she could not name. The mug was in her hand again. She stood absolutely still with her fingers wrapped around warm clay and her heart performing a small, private riot. The mug was intact. The tea inside it was still steaming. Through the greenhouse's angled glass panels, the morning light sat at exactly the angle it had occupied 8 seconds ago, when she had reached for the watering probe and bumped the shelf with her elbow. She looked down at the mug. She looked at the shelf. She set the mug very carefully in the center of the shelf, stepped back, and did not touch it again for the rest of the morning. Rall noticed on the 4th day. He was not supposed to be noticing anything in particular. His assignment was the coolant relay behind the greenhouse's north wall, a routine check, 2 hours at most, valve readings and pressure logs. The greenhouse was a joint habitat feature of Station Werk 4, a long glass structure running the full width of Deck 6, growing food for the human residential block and several ornamental species the Vane community had requested for scent reasons. It was warm inside and smelled complicated. Rall did not object to complicated smells. He recorded his readings and minded his own work. But the human technician was doing something strange. She was young by Rall's estimation, somewhere in her early 20s, with the particular economy of movement that suggested someone who had been working in a confined physical space long enough to stop thinking about where her elbows were. She moved through the greenhouse rows with the practiced ease of someone who had memorized every pot, every shelf, every gap between benches. She did not look clumsy. And yet she kept catching things. The first time he noticed, she was carrying a full tray of seedling pods across the far aisle, and she stumbled slightly on the lip of a drainage channel. Not badly, just a half step of imbalance that should have sent 1 or 2 pods sliding, and they didn't slide. Her hands were already compensating before the stumble finished happening. Rall registered it as quick reflexes, which humans sometimes had, and went back to his gauge. The second time was more unusual. She was watering a shelf of climbing plants on the east wall, nozzle in her left hand, a specimen jar in her right, when a vine coil caught the jar's base and the jar tilted. She should not have had time to react. She did. The jar was level again before Rall's eyes had finished registering that it had tilted. He stared at the back of her head. She kept watering without turning around. The third time, a length of irrigation hose slipped from its hook and swung toward a row of Vane aromatic pots on the middle shelf. She was 3 meters away. She crossed the distance in a way that was simply too fast for the available time. The hose stopped 1 centimeter from the pots. She rehung it, checked the hook fitting, and went back to her work. Rall closed his pressure log. He wrote 1 line in his personal notation: "Human greenhouse tech. Keeps preventing small accidents that she should not have time to prevent." He could not explain it any other way. Petra had begun to understand what she was doing by the end of the first week, though understand was perhaps too strong a word. She had begun to develop a working description, which was different. 8 seconds, that was the window. She could feel the limit the way she could feel the edge of a step in the dark. Not see it, not measure it with instruments, but know the boundary with a certainty that lived in the body rather than the mind. 8 seconds back. No further. Not forward. She had tried in the first confused hours and found nothing in that direction, just the ordinary blankness of the future. Only backward. Only 8 seconds. 1 step and then the moment closed. She had spent the first 3 days preventing accidents. A mug, a tray, a clipboard sliding off a bench, an input error in a requisition form caught before it submitted. It felt like being good at things. It felt like the particular competence of someone who had paid very close attention, and Petra had always wanted to be that kind of person, and for a few days She enjoyed the feeling. Then on the 5th day, she dropped the pale clay mug again. She didn't replay it. She watched it fall. She heard it crack, a clean break handle shearing off at the chip point. Tea spread across the tile in a slow, amber-colored fan. The sound of the crack was small and final. She stood there for a long moment, then crouched down and gathered the pieces. The handle, the body, the chips. She cupped them in both palms. The clay was still warm. She could have caught it. She had had the full 8 seconds, and the mug had been in freefall for 2, maybe 3 of them. She had caught it once already, on the day she discovered the ability, and the mug had sat intact on the shelf for a week after that. She could have done it again. But something had stopped her. She couldn't name what it was yet. Rall finished the coolant relay work on a Friday and was reassigned to Deck 3. He found himself, for reasons he could not fully justify professionally, returning to the greenhouse on his meal break. He told himself it was the vein aromatics, a reasonable explanation. He sat on the low bench near the east wall and watched Petra Vane move through the rows. She was repotting something today, a species of broad-leafed plant, pale green stems that smelled faintly of iron. She worked slowly, more slowly than her speed on the previous days. Not carelessly, deliberately, in the direction of taking longer rather than less time. She lifted a clay pot from a lower shelf and held it up to the light from the angled glass panels. Just held it. The afternoon sun had shifted to a low angle that caught the pot's rim and turned the red clay to a deep amber. She turned it once in her hands. She was not examining it for damage or checking the root holes. She was looking at it in the light for a length of time that had no practical function. Rall watched this for about 20 seconds. Then she set the pot down, picked up her trowel and went back to work. It had started with the light. She had been working the late afternoon shift on a Thursday, alone in the greenhouse after the other staff had gone, and the sun angle had done something extraordinary. Angled in from below the station's habitat ring at the precise degree that turned the whole structure into a prism, bending light into long, warm columns between the plant rows, everything amber and quiet and inexplicably like a memory. She stood in one of the light columns without meaning to. She felt it on her arms and the back of her neck and the tops of her hands. She noticed the specific quality of the silence, which was not silent at all but full of small sounds, the drip of the irrigation lines, the faint creak of the glass expanding in warmth, the distant hum of the ventilation system 3 decks below. The thought arrived plainly. She wanted this moment to last longer. And then, without thinking, she ran the 8 seconds back. Not to prevent anything, not to fix anything. The moment had been intact. Nothing had gone wrong. She had simply wanted to stand in the light again and it had been the same amber and the same warmth and the same particular smell of growing things in afternoon sun. She had stood there twice. After the second time, she sat down on the dirt floor between 2 rows of broadleaf plants and was very quiet for a while. That was when she began to understand what the 8 seconds were actually for. She tested it with small things over the next 2 weeks, because that was the only honest way to test it. She replayed the sound of a vain child's laughter from the corridor outside the greenhouse, a high, strange sound, nothing like human laughter, but with the same quality of involuntary joy, the same sense of something bubbling up from a depth that couldn't be held down. She had been trimming a vine when she heard it. When it faded, she ran it back and listened again. She replayed a meal, a grain bowl with a seasoning she couldn't identify, something faintly bitter and then warm. She had finished it and realized she had not been paying attention. So she ran 8 seconds back to the middle of a mouthful and paid attention. She replayed a colleague's laugh. Daria from the agricultural science team had made a small offhand joke about the seedling labeling system that had been unexpectedly funny, the kind of funny that catches you on the exhale, and the moment had lasted maybe 5 seconds before they both got back to work. Petra replayed it. She heard her own laugh differently the second time. More honest, she thought. Less guarded. She never replayed anything more than once. The second replay was not quite the same as the first, slightly more known, slightly less surprising, like a story whose punchline you already know. The first replay was the good one, the one that returned what had almost been lost to inattention. After that, she stopped preventing accidents. She let the clipboard slide. She let the small errors of a normal day accumulate the way normal days did, and she paid attention to what she actually wanted to keep, and those things she kept. Rall submitted a formal observation to the Joint Species Research Office, the proper channel for behavioral anomalies in shared habitat zones. He described the improbable reaction times and the subsequent shift toward deliberate slowness, and noted that he could explain neither. He received a response from a researcher named Ves Halloran on the xenobehavior team. 3 other staff from Deck 6 had filed similar reports. Current working theory was that the human was performing some cognitively complex process for which no framework existed. Halloran asked Rall to keep watching. Rall wrote back. She held a pot of soil in the afternoon light for 30 seconds and did not examine it for any practical purpose. Is that relevant? The response came the next morning. Yes, please keep watching. Petra was sitting on the low east bench on a Tuesday in November when Daria came to find her. Daria was carrying 2 cups of tea, the good kind, from leaves Petra's team had grown in the greenhouse's southern section, a small batch harvest they'd all been proud of. She handed one to Petra without asking and sat down. The requisition system rejected the order for the new grow lights again, Daria said. I know, Petra said. I resubmitted it. I know, Petra wrapped both hands around the cup. It was warm and slightly heavier than the pale clay mug had been, a thick-walled canteen cylinder, the tea inside pale gold and smelling like the end of something difficult. I saw the notification. Daria made a small, exasperated sound and leaned back against the wall. The afternoon light through the angled panels was doing its amber thing, the thing that only happened at this hour, this season, this particular angle of the station's rotation. Another 10 minutes before the sun shifted and the ordinary fluorescent color returned. They sat quietly for a while, the irrigation lines dripped, the glass creaked. Somewhere below them the ventilation hummed. This is nice, Daria said, which was not a thing she usually said about Tuesday afternoons in November. Yes, Petra said. She felt the 8 seconds sitting in her like a small engine at idle, the way it always felt when she chose not to use it. She had gotten used to that feeling. It was not uncomfortable. It was the feeling of something held in reserve and deliberately not spent, not waste, not loss, just a choice to let the moment be one thing, unrepeated, whole. She was learning that some moments should only happen once, not because they weren't worth keeping, because keeping a moment twice was not the same as living it once and knowing you had. She drank her tea. The gold light moved through the glass and caught the surface of Daria's cup and then caught the rim of her own, and for about 4 seconds the light was exactly right. The warmth and the smell and the sound of dripping water and the particular silence of 2 people not saying much because they didn't need to, and Petra felt it fully, the way she had been practicing feeling things, and did not reach for the 8 seconds. She let it pass. It passed. She held the warm cup in both hands and watched the light shift back to ordinary and understood, clearly and without grief, that she had been there. She had noticed. That was enough. The xenobehavior report that Ves Halloran eventually filed described the phenomenon in terms the team could document but not explain. The subject demonstrated what appeared to be a practiced deliberate presence, a habit of slowing through tasks, of pausing at sensory details with no practical function, of appearing to live each small moment at a higher resolution than the surrounding staff considered standard. A preference for ordinary experience over exceptional experience. a documented willingness to let small accidents occur without intervention. The report's working conclusion was that the subject had developed, through some mechanism the xenobehavior team could not currently identify, an unusually precise awareness of what was worth saving and what was worth letting go. In an appendix added by Rall at the researcher's invitation, she held a cup of tea in both hands in afternoon light for 4 seconds and did not drink from it. She did not appear to be waiting for it to cool. She appeared to be paying attention to holding it. I do not have a framework for this, but I have begun taking my meal breaks in the greenhouse. The broader station population had no access to the report and would not have read it if they had. They simply knew that the young human greenhouse tech had a quality difficult to name, that she was the kind of person who noticed things, who seemed genuinely pleased by small, unremarkable things, who made you feel, standing near her, that whatever was currently happening was more interesting than you had given it credit for. Some of them began taking their meal breaks in the greenhouse too. None of them could have explained why. Petra could have. She had stopped trying to fix the small accidents of ordinary days. She had started trying to deserve them instead.